Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me, Lloyd Auerbach. I welcome those of you who are with us. If anybody's new, welcome to the show. If anybody's been here before, I know we usually have some regulars here. Welcome back. As I think anyone who's attended this before or paid attention to some of my posts, this is for people to ask questions about the psychic world, the paranormal, parapsychology, even some related stuff. I'm sorry about the jiggling of the screen there for a second. Hi, Susanna. Hi, Tina. Good to have you here. So it's always good to have the regulars here. Lapaka, good to see you. By the way, anybody who goes to Hawaii, to Honolulu, you need to check with Mysteries of Hawaii. Go for a great ghost tour. So just kind of, I'll throw that plug in for you. He also has a new novel out called Kahuna. So good to see folks here. One of the folks, I'm not sure if he's made it yet or not, was kind of communicating with me earlier today. That would be Dave Manganelli, who is a good friend of mine, a colleague, another fellow investigator, and videographer and professional photographer. So I've got a couple things to talk about from him. And hi, Mariah and Melody. Good to see you here as well. So it's coming to the end of kind of more or less the end of summer at this point. I just finished teaching. My summer class this year was presenting the paranormal to the public, which covered things like writing about the subject, public speaking, doing media interviews, and some other assorted elements, including talking credibly about it. And I thought I'd start out by saying something about the credibility issue, because frankly, a lot of the people who speak at these conferences, the paranormal conferences, the ghost conferences, their credibility seems to be questionable. And when I say credibility being questionable, I mean that their claims are often related. And this is, a fine thing if this is what the event wants to do, was just being on TV. They happen to be on Ghost Hunters. They happen to be on one of the other shows somewhere, or they're making their own show. But reality TV, as some of you have been here before, is not reality in any circumstance. So at the very least, it's edited. At the worst, it's directed in a particular storyline. So when you see people speaking at conferences, it's important to listen to them. And I'm including myself here, by the way. If I start going off on a tangent and don't sound credible in the sense that if you were to check out what I'm talking about, do a little, and I hate to say online research because there's so many bad sources on the internet, but I come from the field of parapsychology, which has been studying psychic phenomena, the paranormal, since officially 1882. So you need to kind of sometimes check out what's being talked about. And I've talked about this in previous sessions, that I've occasionally heard other people speaking at conferences, one who was putting out an idea that ghosts have to do with subatomic particles, which is a fine idea as speculation, but not as fact. And he didn't even understand the size of subatomic particles in relation to things like flash photography or anything else. So he was questionable for me a little bit as I was listening to him. As soon as he said, orbs are created by your flash reflecting off of a quantum particle, the photons, by the way, that light being bigger than the quantum particle, credibility is out the window. Another one was talking about Wicca. And for some reason, she decided to say that Halloween has nothing to do with Wicca and it's the season of the devil. And Wiccans don't believe in the devil generally. So you have little things that can come through. The TV thing is not enough for credibility, and nor is the idea that somebody's done investigations for a really long time, unless they have training and really look into what the investigation is. And that gives me a great time to switch into talking about what Dave sent me earlier today, and he's here, in fact. So if my producer could put the link into the chat or up on the screen. There was an article that Dave pointed to me, which is from The Verge on the web, and I highly recommend you all read this. Thinking about what this means for photos that people claim are paranormal, all right? Because we have already had to deal when getting a photo that people say it's a ghost or is this a ghost, just even asking about it. We've already had to deal with things like a glitch in the camera or the photographic equipment or the video in itself, which can happen, by the way, especially with digital, or something in the room or the area that is reflective of the flash, because most orb pictures are taken with flashes. Or maybe it's somebody's taken a picture of you and sent you a photo telling you, oh my gosh, there's a ghost in the background. I took this picture of you and there's a ghost there. I've gotten people sending me that picture that their friend took of them. It was really a prank. It was created typically with a ghost app. There are plenty of photo apps for ghosts, which will put a ghost into your picture. So those things are important. And then, of course, there's the manipulation of a photograph after it's been taken, a little editing using Photoshop. And now we have a bigger problem because it's a lot easier than Photoshop. And that's what the article's about. That AI can actually insert things into photos, and it can be seamless as far as the naked eye, how we look at them, how we're dealing with this. It's making it, as we've all heard about deep fakes and seen videos, and there's audio simulation of people's voices. It would be really easy using AI to create EVP-like messages. We can't trust technology anymore, at least not that kind of technology. Digital technology is easy to manipulate. Just too many things, especially now with AI. So for those of you who are interested in gathering evidence and presenting evidence, you need to consider whenever someone gives you or shows you a photo or even a video or even potentially an audio clip, how was that created? What were the conditions under which this was created? Any of the possibilities that I just mentioned, is that possible? Could those things have been manipulated? My question, I actually have a list of questions when somebody sends me a picture, if I don't have an easy explanation for it, is asking them why they thought this picture has something to do with the paranormal. I have people sending me pictures with blurs on them, with orbs on them, things like that, taken in their home. They want to know, is this a ghost? My question is, if you didn't have the picture, would you think your house was haunted? We are always dealing with human experiences. Technology is questionable. For those of you that might be doing ghost investigations, start thinking about film cameras again and negatives. You can still have problems with film cameras, but at least we can look into the negative, and it's a lot harder to manipulate a negative than it is to do that with a positive, with an actual photograph that's there. All right. Paranormal Concierge is saying people don't know what they don't know, so they will believe what is claimed by many of these presenters and investigators. That is absolutely true. And kind of on that point, and thank you, Dave, for sending that to me. It will be one of the important readings for some of my classes going forward. There are a lot of things that can happen in our homes that we don't notice. Simple things. And unless you know what to look for, if you are predisposed to thinking something paranormal is going on, you have a problem. And I've had this all the time over the years. With the exception of a couple of cases I can think of, people make mistakes. They misinterpret things that they've perceived with their normal senses because they didn't know what was causing it. My late friend Pete Haviland, had an incredible case where all these knockings in the walls were going on. Some things were happening in the house. This is in Texas. And it turned out a possum had gotten into the walls, was still alive, and was making all sorts of noise. He liked to call that the polter possum case. But even when he showed the woman and they got someone there to get the possum out and things stopped, she was still convinced her house was haunted. So some people are predisposed to believing that. There were studies, there was a couple of surveys during COVID and after COVID by real estate companies who found that people during COVID, especially during the lockdown, for some reason, the number of folks who thought their homes were haunted or had some paranormal activity had jumped incredibly, huge percentage-wise. And the realtors figured out it's because people had never noticed the noises their homes make because they hadn't been stuck in their house for 24 hours a day for weeks on end. So we, as investigators and researchers, looking at the phenomena, in order to study something, you must eliminate all the other possibilities. If we do an ESP experiment, we have to eliminate any possibility that the person can pick up things with their normal senses. You know, we call that sensory leakage, that there's anything in the background that could have led them to make a guess, or just simply that they're doing guesswork. We have to eliminate any other possibility. Otherwise, what the skeptics say are right, which is basically you don't have any evidence. We have lots of evidence under really controlled conditions. So that's all really important. It's really important for folks to question claims. Again, I'm fine if people ask, question my background, question things. That gets me into a nice dialogue with people very often, in a really positive way most of the time. And I've actually ended up with students in classes because of being questioned for that. All right, Mary Prankster, what do you think of the representation of ghosts with sheets? I know it has to do with shrouds, but has anyone ever seen one like that? Not as far as I know. I mean, and sorry about the shaking again. Just my cat just knocked into the table. It's an old it's an old literary representation of ghosts. Goes back at least to the 19th century. I think it actually goes back much, much further than that. Probably into theatrical presentations, maybe even as far back well before Shakespeare, for that matter. I haven't really looked into when that first started, folklore-wise. There's someone I can actually check with on that. But, obviously, it was just a way, from a theatrical perspective, how else, if you are not dealing with special effects, or if it's before a technique that was used in the latter part of the 19th century called Pepper's Ghost, where they could actually have somebody shown on stage transparently. It's a little optical illusion, a little bit of magic there. One way to show that you're dealing with a spirit without the actors specifically saying that they're spirits would be actually to put a sheet over somebody. And of course, people have always thought that when they see something smoky or an amorphous shape floating around that might be glowing or something, that must be a spirit. So it kind of leads to that. As far as I know, I can't say no one has ever seen something like that, because it's possible people have. It doesn't mean that actually was an apparition, but I've never heard of anyone who's seen a ghost in any culture for that matter. So always fun for cartoons, not so much fun for other things. And of course, you don't want to be wearing a sheet anytime soon, anytime in recent times, because you might be mistaken for some other evil being with serious bias and prejudice. Okay. That was a little bit of a diatribe here. I will say also that for anybody who's interested in psychic phenomena in the paranormal, keep in mind that it's not just one thing. It's not just ghosts. It's not just hauntings. It's not just poltergeists. That seems to be when people say the paranormal these days, they're talking about ghostly things. Sometimes they might be talking about other things like, Bigfoot and things like that, but generally it's just the ghostly stuff. The word paranormal means on the side of normal. So when in the field of parapsychology and psychical research, we study these experiences people have, which include apparition experiences and haunting experiences and poltergeist activity experiences. But all of those connect to the root types of things we study with living people otherwise, which is extrasensory perception, picking up information without the use of the senses, which you need if you're seeing a ghost, you need if you're experiencing a haunting. And then the other is psychokinesis, or mind over matter, which you need if we're talking about poltergeists. Even if a ghost moves something, that's still psychokinesis, or PK. So we deal with all that, and all of it has to do with consciousness. So in many respects, parapsychology is the study of interactions between consciousness and the physical world, and the not so physical world, when we talk about apparitions and such for that. So limiting yourself just to ghosts, you can specialize, but limiting yourself without the kind of basic understanding of other things leads to very bizarre speculation and models, I won't even call them theories, of what ghosts actually are. And a lot of it that I hear today tends to be folklore. I mean, here's a piece of modern folklore. You must investigate in the dark because that's the best time to catch spirits. That's actually completely untrue. There is almost no evidence that shows that that's the case. That can be the case in individual incidents or cases. where somebody was woken up in the middle of the night and saw an apparition there, or might have actually experienced a haunting, which is that residue, that kind of imprint. If the original event was middle of the night, then that's going to be in the middle of the night. But lights don't matter. In fact, the majority of recorded and submitted apparition experiences for the last 140 plus years, people saw or experienced the ghost when the lights were on or during the daytime. So and I've actually seen examples and talked to clients or people who had the local ghost hunting group come out, and they could not figure out why the ghost hunting group wanted to be there after midnight when their experiences were at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. One couple said, wouldn't they wanted to be here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? When we suggested that to them, they laughed at us and said, no, it's got to be nighttime. So all of that's folklore, and the original piece of that folklore, must be in the dark, comes from physical mediumship in the early 20th century and slightly before that as well. So it's not even related to apparition experiences or haunting experiences, certainly not the poltergeist experiences. One of the places I work with, the Moss Beach Distillery, which is a restaurant south of San Francisco. I haven't really done much with them at all in the last few years. But I did investigation, pieces of the investigation, because it's a long-term investigation over the years since 1991. And there have been a few times that we've had requests from TV shows to go to the place and shoot the show there because it's got this history, all of that. And for the most part, some of the shows had paid a location fee. I mean, they did something with Unsolved Mysteries way back when in the early 90s. And they paid a location fee. When you're dealing with a working restaurant, anybody who is connected to TV at all or considers things that you might want to do for YouTube, just realize that a restaurant doesn't shut down because somebody wants to do an investigation, even for television. So TV shows need to pay a location fee because the restaurant still has to pay their employees if it's like cutting out the meals, and there's got to be tips and all that stuff has to be taken care of. There's a lot of financial stuff there. But the distillery, there was a recent show that wanted to do a segment there, and considering the fact that they weren't going to do a location fee, that was number one to turn them down. But the other reason is, that they would have turned us down or the restaurant down is because there's a lot of windows and there are street lights and neighbors who have their lights on, and there would be no way unless they put blacked out the windows that the place would be dark. So very, very, that just doesn't fit the TV model at all. All right, Dave is asking, are there any good cases from crowded apartment buildings which the haunting ghost events actually expanded from one apartment into others? I have had a couple of cases where there was activity in one apartment and apparitional activity. So there's a couple different things. Obviously, if it's haunting, it's relating to past people who lived there. So it's going to be specific to the apartment, to the location, unless stuff went on all across the building. But I know of cases where had one where the ghost did move around to different apartments. We were able to talk to several people in the different apartments at that point. I had a case where it was a four or six? It was not a huge apartment building. It was a fourplex, I believe it was. And the ghost, as it turned out, the people who called me in were having an experience, and it was really interesting that there was not just the couple that were living there, but also other people happened to notice the ghost. And then it turned out that the neighbors had also seen the ghost. And then going back historically, the ghost had been seen in different apartments in the 4-apartment complex for years, for 20 years. So if it's conscious, if we're dealing with consciousness, then it's not a surprise in that circumstance. If the building didn't used to be an apartment building, you might have imprints that seem to be in multiple apartments for that reason, multiple parts of the building as well. If they chopped up the building into different apartments. Let's see here. You need to go. The energy has shifted. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Mariah. Do you feel a relaxed or lighthearted state of mind is more helpful in perceiving parapsychological phenomena? Absolutely. Um, and maybe, certainly a relaxed state of mind, but whether or not you're lighthearted, I think may depend on the circumstance, of course. I will say that we have, in apparition experiences or cases that we've dealt with, myself, folks that have worked with me, we have certainly Annette Martin, who is a psychic medium I worked with for years, even things she had done without me. It was always good if you approach the case with the idea that ghosts are people too. And you want the ghost to like you. You want to be friendly. You want to be a little lighthearted. That gets cooperation, as opposed to yelling at the ghost to dance monkey dance. That usually ends up with either no reaction whatsoever, or the ghost getting a little pissed off at you. Rightly so, by the way, and either kind of spooking you out of the place or doing something else. Did the skull experiments have to be conducted in the dark? That's a really good question. They were trying to do stuff with physical mediumship. Some of the phenomena reported in the skull experiments, which included lights, colored lights and things actually appearing visually to people, that would have to have been done in the dark, certainly. But physical object movement or other types of communication didn't necessarily need to be in the dark. The question, though, is the psychology of the people who are there. In physical mediumship, that might be genuine because so much of it is fraudulent. The darkness actually, and permission and believing that things can happen in the dark, might cause their own unconscious to create effects. It's not clear in a lot of physical mediumship work that exists today and certainly in the past, because so much of it has little to do with the sitters, the people who are there. It's not like they're getting a medium reading where the spirit's coming in to the medium and telling people about themselves and their relatives. It's always about the physical effects. And that just as easily could be coming from the medium, who firmly believes that this so-called spirit is, instead of being their personality or their unconscious, it's something from the outside. Also could be a combination of things. I need to go. The energy shifts to the Moss Beach Distillery. Yes, that's what it is. Yes. Mariah, I know. I'm just trying to find a good day. I've already talked to them about coming down for lunch and just chatting with them, again, seeing what we can actually do. All right, the USS Hornet. I will tell you that there will be a Night of Spirits at the USS Hornet on Friday evening, October 18th. I don't think they've announced it yet. I cannot be there this year. That's the date that I just got asked by the folks there. And unfortunately or fortunately, I will be at the Forever Family Foundation Grief Retreat here in the Bay Area that weekend. And as president of that foundation, I'm also participating in a lot of the things there. So unfortunately, I won't be able to go to the Hornet that time. But they are doing an event, the Night of Spirits. We'll have to see what else we can do past that. I'll talk to Heidi over there and see if there's something else I can do. And I'm hoping to do an event at the Moss Beach Distillery as well. All right. So other questions. I have a completely different question from Dave Manganelli. So if there aren't any other immediate questions on the paranormal, we'll move on to his question. And I'm not seeing anything popping up. Okay, so given climate change, what's happening right now, will that affect the growing of cacao and the prices of chocolate down the road? There's a lot of crops. I understand that the strawberry crop, I just read something about the strawberry crop in California and other places because of climate change, is going to be significantly less next year. So as far as chocolate is concerned, there have been a couple of concerns the last few years. Here's the good news. For anybody who buys really good quality chocolate, most of the companies, especially the artisan chocolate makers, have arrangements with the specific farmers. Oh, don't do that. Little jiggling again with the table here from the cat. So most of the farmers are already being paid more than fair use or fair trade. They're kind of locked up for a number of years. The question is whether or not the amount of cacao that's grown by these farms is going to shrink or not. And it really depends on the area and how the grower deals with that. Climate change will definitely affect some of the largest growing areas, which are really the Ivory Coast of Africa, which is where a huge percentage of cacao comes from to make chocolate that is purchased by Hershey, Nestle's, Mars, and other really large, Calabo, the really large companies. So they're actually trying to help with other places, but there's actually more and more cacao growers in other parts of the world that have been increasing the amount of cacao. The demand, unfortunately, has been growing, so we may see some changes down there, but prices aren't going to change that much for those who are already paying $8 to $10 a bar, which I often do. I think those people who are buying Hershey's milk chocolate bars, those bars may go up in price. The lower end chocolates are definitely going to go up in price. But it really is going to depend on how much the global warming actually affects the growing of cacao. In some respects, there's a fungus called witch's broom that, as long as that fungus doesn't come into the cacao growing anywhere, people are going to be okay. But there have been times in the past where a whole crop, a large crop in different parts of the world, have been attacked by this fungus, and that has caused a shortage. And that can, of course, increase the price a little bit. So that can happen. Tina is saying maybe you could time your visit to the Moss Beach Distillery with a visit to Ano Nuevo Beach. Yeah, I've seen the elephant seals, and yeah, I have to go down there and see what I want to do down in Half Moon Bay and those other areas as well. Probably try to make a day of it and into the evening, so I don't have to deal with traffic coming home. And I wanted to switch back to chocolate for a while. For anybody who doesn't know why I'm talking about chocolate and why I can talk about this, I also have gotten a certificate as a professional chocolatier a number of years ago. I do guided chocolate tastings, talk to a number of chocolate makers, so it's one of my favorite other subjects. I actually make chocolate once in a while. Any paranormal events actually ever occur at the ASPR HQ? I assume you mean activity as opposed to research and presentations. I don't recall anyone working there when I was there talking about anything paranormal happening in the building other than the presentations that Alex Tanis did. I worked with a little bit with one of our research subjects who was a martial artist who could do a little PK. So we had that kind of stuff. Alex could do out-of-body stuff. We had a research program in that. I wasn't directly involved in the research at all, but I did work with the individual participants sometimes, or part of the research myself, like as a helper in the research. But I don't recall there ever being any ghostly phenomena or, other than psychics having experiences, nothing really much there. Lloyd Wonka and the Haunted Chocolate Factory. Now, I am haunted by chocolate. That's basically my thing. All right. Is ectoplasm the materialization of a paranormal event? And is it created by the mind or some other type of phenomena? Okay. The word ectoplasm comes from Charles Richet back in the 1900s, the 19th century. He was a researcher in parapsychology and psychical research. He proposed, now I want to set the ground here a little bit. In the 19th century, even during the scientific revolution and such, the Industrial Revolution, as things are developing in the latter part of the 1800s, there was a model of the universe that space had something called ether. That space wasn't empty. It wasn't a vacuum. It had something called ether, and that allowed light to propagate. It's kind of like sound through water. That's been shown not to be the case. So science marches on, of course. He was proposing that spirits who materialize to people, because the word materialize was used quite a bit, that if people see a spirit, the assumption was the eyes were seeing the spirit. We know that's not the case. But the assumption was that there must be some kind of material that could allow a spirit or an entity to pull together into a visual image, and especially in some of the seances. That word that he came up with in this model was ectoplasm, spirit matter or spirit material. That was immediately seized upon by physical mediums, immediately. And it was more promoted by the frauds than anything else. There were mediums who might have produced something. The question is, was every witness piece of ectoplasm fraud or not? And the answer is we don't know. Number one, a lot of fraud was caught. It was often luminous cheesecloth, the cheesecloth dipped in some luminous paint or dye that was secreted on the body, sometimes within the body. Mediums could produce it out of their mouth, out of other orifices sometimes. They would hide it inside the body, which is kind of gross when you think about it. But there were some times that folks would touch the ectoplasm and would immediately dissolve. It would disappear. So nobody's got a real sample of ectoplasm. It only seemed to be identified in physical mediumship, and this was another reason for darkness, that ectoplasm supposedly in the light would not be shown and would just simply dissolve, which is really interesting considering the fact that it was used as an explanation for how a ghost shows up to somebody in full light. Not the case. So the ghost hunting world, mainly the shows, in looking for different terms as well as the folklore, hit upon the ectoplasm thing. And ghost hunters, if they didn't see an orb, if they saw something wispy or smoky in their photographs or video, that must be ectoplasm, because what else could it be? Well, what else it could be is a flash reflecting off somebody smoking and the smoke in the air, or moisture in the air, or if it's cold outside, their breath, because the particles of moisture will reflect the light. So we don't really consider this as necessarily a real thing. If there is real ectoplasm, then the question, which is the typical question with physical mediumship in general, is what's coming through the medium, the physical activity, ectoplasm, the verbal stuff, is that coming from the unconscious and therefore the psychokinetic ability, which we all have an aptitude for? Is it coming from the medium, or is there a spirit involved at all? Is there an external spirit that is coming into that person's body and using the body to generate that stuff? We don't know. So it's still a big question, because the activity that was most active for ectoplasm was 100 years ago. The problem these days, when there are physical mediums, several of them have been caught cheating because someone snuck in a night shot camera, even though, with the rarest exception, the physical mediums insist that no one use a night shot camera, because the infrared light will harm the spirits, harm the ectoplasm. And yet, physical mediumship, going back to the early 20th century, they could do things under a red light. There was a reason for the red light, by the way. It has to do with fraud. But a red light bulb, unless it's LED, gives off heat. And that heat is infrared. So when someone says, and this actually has happened with one particular medium I know, in an argument with one of my colleagues, using red light and the ectoplasm even showing up under red light, and insisting that the tiny amount of infrared generated by a night shot camera, which is a little spotlight, will harm the spirits, while he's got a red light sitting next to him, which is generating significantly more infrared than that night shot camera is. So that's either because he doesn't want to get caught in fraud, or it could be a sincere belief and a lack of understanding of things like heat from a bulb. Again, folklore. What are my thoughts that there is something unique in the brain which allows certain remote viewing abilities to be better than others? Well, the Stargate viewers have not had any sort of, as far as I know, I think actually I'm trying to remember if there might have been some more recent fMRI studies with a couple of the folks like Joe McMoneagle and Angela Ford. I'm going to have to ask Ed May about that. The one thing, there really haven't been brain studies. And the thing is that remote viewing is something that people seem to have an aptitude for. it's not much different than it is. Remote viewing is just ESP, but it's ESP targeting a distance that most of us would think would be impossible. So one of the key elements of the remote viewers is that they believe they can do this. And belief is the most correlated characteristic for any psychic ability or psychic phenomena. But I do know that several of the viewers, from what Ed May's been able to find out, have some degree of synesthesia. That's still not quite understanding what's happening in the brain, but there's a genetic component to that as well. So it's being looked at. Certainly, there were no brain studies of the Stargate viewers during the Stargate program. That would have been through 1995, and there just wasn't any focus on that. They were just more concerned about the information than what's actually going on. Can they do this practical thing, or can they not? Not as much looking at the understanding. Ed May's been looking at some other things that might affect that, the success in remote viewing. But the brain studies, you need very specialized equipment. And I know that there is a research place down in Brazil, and they are doing some work there, but they haven't actually started doing work with the remote viewers from the Stargate program. I know they're working with some mediums down in Brazil. Pretty easy to find mediums in Brazil, actually, because of the belief in spiritism down there. Okay, anybody else have anything they want to toss out there? Because I'll change tactics a little bit here. Okay, thought I'd mention we haven't set up our courses yet for the Rhine Center, which will start the first full week of October. I am still hoping that I'll be able to get in touch with a particular skeptic I've worked with in the past, Kenny Biddle. I've sent him several emails and haven't heard back. He and I have taught a course called A Skeptical Approach to Parapsychology, which, even though he's on the disbelieving side, he really kind of focuses on critical thinking and having people kind of think through things. And that's what the course is about, is true skepticism as opposed to pseudo-skepticism. True skepticism meaning asking a lot of questions and possibly doubting the evidence until you can vet it, or at least say that it falls into a camp. It's more likely to be this, or more likely to be that. And he really does some great lectures. And if we connect in the next couple of weeks, then we'll be teaching a skeptical approach to parapsychology this fall. Otherwise, John Kruth and I are going to be teaching a 6-week course, which is ethics for field investigators. It'll also be good for other folks too. And it's going to focus on how to treat your clients and the ethics of reporting on your cases, and even the ethics of dealing with spirits, for that matter. We've taught a slightly shorter version of that before, and John and I teach it together. There's a little bit of difference of opinion on certain things when it comes to field investigation, because John's coming from the research end of things, but that only makes it more interesting, I think, for people attending the course. And then right now, from what I understand, I'll be teaching a class called The People of Parapsychology, which is going to be looking at some of the major folks and a few minor folks going back mainly to the start of the Society for Psychical Research in 1882. But I'm going to be talking about a little bit about some earlier folks as well. And, what have they done? What were their ideas? What models of theirs kind of still work today? We'll be kind of going from the SPR start to about the 1970s, to the start of Stargate, I think, for that. I'm not sure what the other courses are that are being offered by the Rhine. They'll be announced after Labor Day. So John Kruth is actually, I don't know if he's back yet, probably not. But this past week has been the Parapsychological Association convention, the annual convention, and it's been in Mexico. I did not go this year for a couple of reasons, but John certainly is down there, so we haven't had a chance to connect here. Speaking of remote viewing, what do you think of the movie The Meadowsteric Goats? All right, Chris, that's based in a book by John Ronson, and that was not the remote viewing the Stargate program. So it's important to know that that group, the Men Who Stare at Goats, or that movie, which was made into a comedy. I think it's a fine movie, but I kind of enjoy the movie quite a bit, especially knowing what I know about that group. The book is a lot more serious, but there are some things in the book that the book didn't really cover everything. That was a group, John Alexander and a number of others in the Army decided, because of interest in parapsychology and psychic phenomena, that maybe they could learn to be real Jedi, to learn to be psychics themselves, to do psychokinesis, especially things like that. And they did work they worked with a number of folks, one of whom was a martial artist named Guy Savelli, who we had worked with at the ASPR, and actually I'd done a workshop with him at John F. Kennedy University in the early 80s. And Guy was teaching them various advanced kung fu psychic techniques, including some shielding techniques. They asked to learn something called a dim mak, which in kung fu legend is the delayed death touch, not even a blow. The idea is you gather your chi energy and you put it into somebody by touching a certain part of their body, and it will eventually disrupt organs. And actually, Guy sent me photos when they had asked him to show how this might work. They had done it to goats. And the joke that when the book came out, Guy called me. We were talking, and he said, "Well, you saw the photos. It should have been called The Men Who Touched the Goats. It was not the staring at goats. They had to actually touch for the dim mak." But that would be a terrible title for a book, and a terrible title for a movie that wasn't necessarily, freaky, sexual, that kind of thing. So, they didn't have a lot of success, like in the movie. They didn't have much success in certain things. There was some success with learning shielding techniques. In fact, Guy went on to teach some Army Rangers and Special Forces people various techniques. And I even have a video, although it's a fourth generation dub, so it's kind of sketchy in terms of some static here and there, but some pretty amazing things that these guys were taught by Guy, and how to take a blow, how to use the dim mak on in certain ways, that kind of thing. So pretty interesting, some of the stuff they did. But again, it was called the Earth's First Battalion, or I think it was the Earth's First Battalion, or the First Earth Battalion. I can't quite remember exactly what it was. Nothing, not funded, nothing to do with the Stargate program, not a black budget thing. It was a group of folks in the Army who did it on their own. So I mean, if they got any funding, it was not a full project. So anyway, but it was a fun movie. I've seen it a couple times. It's definitely worth watching. There are a lot of fun psychic related movies. They're just not necessarily based on reality, or they don't reflect reality. And in fact, always remember, when you see a movie that is inspired by true events, the inspiration is probably a 25 word or less description, might be a little bit more than that. And then the screenwriter just goes off in dramatic ways. So different. The Rhine Research Center does have a remote viewing practice group. That's right. You can find out about it by going to Rhine Online or just rhine.org. You can see the link there in the chat. Do you find that more cases with a residual or intelligent hauntings are in locations near water like oceans, rivers, and so on? Okay, first, we don't use the term intelligent haunting. Just to let you know, apparitions, the better term for this, that indicates consciousness. Intelligence doesn't indicate consciousness necessarily. And haunting in itself has been used before the ghost hunting community got a hold of that term. It was always, or typically, used for repetitive, patterned events perceived by people in a place. So, looking at the Gettysburg battlefield, for example, are people picking up on the battle itself, but it was never interactive. So then residual came in. It usually used to be called psychic imprints. The term residual is used, and it's a fine term. I think it actually does reflect things, but for us, it's just hauntings. An apparition or conscious entity no more haunts a house than we do. Technically, I live in my house. I'm haunting it. If I was a regular at a bar, like Cliff and Norm on Cheers, the TV show Cheers, I would be haunting those places. In fact, the word haunt refers to a place. So really the interaction of an apparition who may or may not stay in one place, we use that term more regularly. There is no relationship between apparitions or hauntings, for that matter, near water, rivers, lakes, streams. Maybe there's an underground stream or something like that. There may be a relation to geomagnetic fields, because there are connections or correlations between geomagnetic field fluctuations and our own psychic abilities or experiences. So there may be that. And certainly running water can actually influence geomagnetic fields. There's a lot of factors that can influence geomagnetic fields, including Earth movement. So that may be the relationship. But there's no correlation here. People have reported things in the Midwest, in the desert. There's all sorts of places all over the world. There are all these different experiences people have reported. Is anyone currently conducting active research with gifted PK subjects? Felicia Parise was an amazing gifted subject. Karen Getzla was another one who did a lot of research. As far as I know, there are no gifted macro PK subjects right now working with researchers in a research program. I've not heard of anything. I do need to look at I just downloaded the abstracts from the Parapsychological Association convention. It might be that somebody in that schedule actually reported on something. I do know folks at the Institut Metapsychique in France, in Paris. It's a 100-plus-year-old organization, one of the longest running organizations besides the SPR out there. And Eric Doolin has been doing PK research. So he may be doing stuff there. I know that we've worked with a woman named Cheryl Lee Black before. She worked with Jim Carpenter and others at the Rhine Center. So there have been some stuff, but nothing as concerted as what was done with Felicia Parise and Karen Getzla back then. There are occasional references to the core of the Earth changing direction or slowing down. Yeah, that's going to have some geomagnetic implications, for sure. That's no question about that. What those are, don't know at this point. Just like, here's something that my late colleague Martin Caden pointed out when we were talking about the geomagnetic connection with human beings and psychic ability. When astronauts leave the Earth's magnetosphere, the Earth-Moon kind of system, especially going towards Mars, there's no geomagnetic field. I mean, there's other radiation and stuff. And Mars doesn't have, it has a dead core. So there's really not a geomagnetic field on Mars. There's definitely an electromagnetic field, but nothing like what we have here on the Earth. And Marty was basically raising the question, and he talked to his buddies at NASA about that, and they were thinking about this too, not to do with psychic stuff, but how is that going to impact the brains of astronauts, of people traveling to other places? Fortunately, it's not hard to create an artificial geomagnetic field. That's pretty easy to do. In fact, you can all buy a helmet that'll do that if you want to do that. Let's see. Isn't John Kruth conducting research on aphantasia? All right, so this is hit. I think there was an article in The Atlantic in the last couple of weeks, that magazine, on aphantasia, maybe a term you've never heard before. All right, so here's a question for everybody watching this. Close your eyes and picture in your mind an apple. Just for a moment. Just visualize an apple. You can open your eyes. The article actually talks about different degrees of this, but there are different degrees of visualization. Some people may very clearly see a 3D red apple or yellow apple or mottled apple in their mind's eye. Some people might see a vague shape or outline. Some people actually might see the word Apple instead of an actual apple, or might see the logo for Apple Computer, for that matter. Something might visualize there. And then there'll be some people who don't see anything, can't visualize anything. When you can't visualize, that is called aphantasia. And so John Kruth with Christine Simmons Moore, who is at the University of West Georgia. They are looking into aphantasia and any sort of relationship with ESP. Because, for example, with remote viewing, the implication of remote viewing is that it's visual. Actually, it should be called remote perception, because the best viewers, the RV people, will pick up visual stuff. They will pick up auditory stuff. They will pick up sometimes feelings. Let's say, is it hot or cold outside? Wherever I'm viewing, they might pick up vibration. They might pick up, like, is something shaking? They might pick up taste in their mouth or smells, just really kind of any form of seemingly sensory perception, even though it's not coming through the senses. We in our society, and many societies, as human beings, we put a high emphasis on our visual sense, our sense of sight. Consequently, remote viewing is because of that emphasis. But there are people who are psychics. I mean, you'll hear mediums talk about being clairaudient, meaning they hear the spirits talking. They don't see spirits at all. There are other forms of, they love to call them the clairs. It's just how someone actually gets information. That's your way of being. Some people are more visual, auditory, and so on. You know, if you ever met anybody who says, I see what you mean, I hear what you're saying, I feel you, man. Those are all different ways that people process information, and they're really talking about the way that they perceive the world. So it's this interesting thing. And with ESP, for example, with ESP cards, what picture am I looking at? What symbol am I looking at? Well, somebody who can't visualize may actually not get the image at all. They may have a feel for which of the symbols it is. So there's some work going on in that area, which is pretty interesting. And Tina, you saw a really delicious apple. Your fave is the Honeycrisp. I prefer Envy apples myself. I'm not a big fan of the Honeycrisp, as it happens. Opal apples are also really good. And it's coming up the season here in the Bay Area for Gravenstein apples. And we don't get some of the great apples they get in New York. Growing up in the New York area, I miss a lot of those apples as well. All right. At a police dispatch school in San Jose, an individual came in and stole the teacher's purse. It was a plant. Oh, all descriptions of the thief were different. There have been those kinds of simulations where they have a bunch of people and somebody comes running in very quickly and, shoots off a gun, even though it's just blanks, or bangs into something. And people were looking at that. This is the problem with witness testimony. When it's an event that's really fast, especially, you can't study something, the descriptions are going to be minimal or way off based on assumptions and biases. That's the case. So that happens to people. There are assumptions and biases we all have. As an example, even magicians who might be great at sleight of hand and or illusion are often not aware of what's actually going on in a circumstance. That's one of the reasons why we have to be really careful when psychokinesis is reported or is displayed to us. There might be misinterpretation. There also could be fraud, and we have to really look for that. All right. And it's actually an interesting thing that mentalists can often fool magicians. Seems to be one of the reasons why a lot of magicians are starting to do mentalism. I have fooled magicians with my total lack of sleight of hand skills, pretending to do sleight of hand with a deck of cards where every single card was the same card. Magicians will never ask you to see the deck. Everybody else in the world, lay people, always will. All right. Various perceptions can be influenced by life experience, by our culture, the environment we grew up in. Anthropologically, we know this is the case. It's different all over the world. Even David Blaine has showed that in one of his early specials of how people perceive things differently. I have a good example in my past working with a buddy of mine who was an incredible sleight of hand guy. He taught me, and I've since forgotten. I'm not into sleight of hand, but he taught me a 4-ace trick, basically where you take the 4 aces and bury them in the deck, and doing a little manipulation, the aces come to the top of the deck. All right. So he taught me this routine, and we then went to a magician's meeting, some of whom were very good magicians, some of them were really, really hobbyists. And Steve does the 4-ace trick, and then he says, you know, I've taught Lloyd to do sleight of hand. He's going to show you something, but he's not going to use cards. He's going to use tarot cards. So I told a story. Instead of using the aces, I used some court cards. I did exactly the same movements that Steve did. I mean, movement for movement. The only difference was I'm dealing with a deck of tarot cards and telling a story. And after that, not a single one of them thought any, they just were wondering how I did what I did. They were asking me questions. Many of them knew the 4-ace trick that Steve had done. He purposely did something that most of them would know. But even the guys who did that exact trick did not have any idea that that's what I was doing, because I'm not using playing cards. I was using tarot cards, and because I was telling a story. So there are biases even in those people who can see right through things. My house, yeah, it is haunted. It produces bars of chocolate. Really produces a lot more truffles these days than bars of chocolate at this point. Have you heard of the research done by Gary? In fact, I had dinner with Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée a number of years ago concerning remote viewing and brain structures. Yeah, he was very interested in, and he's working with Ed May, because Gary Nolan has done some of the analysis of DNA. He was, if I recall correctly, he was involved in the genome project looking at kind of the DNA or the structure of the AIDS virus, HIV. And then he was involved in the human genome project in general. But he had some ideas about synesthesia connecting to remote viewing as well. And so I am aware of what he's doing, and I'm aware of some of his stuff today. He's coming at it from a very different perspective, but we need that for mainstream science. We need folks kind of coming in as well. Okay, we're down to a couple minutes. Caitlin, I want to thank you. Started taking magnesium supplements, started dreaming again. Okay, cool. Absorbing your regular diet through the whole real foods. Yeah. You know, there's some interesting stuff. You know, I didn't mention the other reason why the price of chocolate might go up, or something might happen. I don't know how many of you have been seeing some articles that have kind of been panicking people about the content of possible heavy metals in some chocolate bars or from some parts of the world. You know, as long as you're not eating huge, you know, I tend to eat really dark chocolate, but I don't eat a huge amount every day. I'm not eating a whole bar every day. In fact, the darker the chocolate, the harder it is to actually eat a whole bar. So I'm not getting a lot of the cadmium or lead, and it really depends on the area of the world it comes from. It's from the soil. Now, there's some producers might use devices to grind the chocolate that might have some lead residue on them or have something like that. But actually, one of the articles I read is that sometimes the lead gets on the cacao because of the emissions from the trucks that are carting it away or driving around the plantation, because they're still using leaded gas. So there's ways that they're going to look at how they can clean the cacao from that. But fact is that if they were to check bananas or a number of other crops from tropical areas, from other areas of the world, which also grows cacao, they would probably find some heavy metals in some of that too. So it's gonna be careful. And we have, you know, certain this stuff. It can build up, but it depends on the kind of chocolate, where it's from, all of that, and how much you actually eat of the really, really dark chocolate. So I eat stuff at like 70, generally no less than 70% cacao, which is not much. And I don't eat much at all. But if you're eating a whole bar every day, it might impact you a little bit. All right, it is the hour, time for me to go. I got some pasta sauce I've been making on the stove. And just want to thank everybody for coming. And yes, the climate crisis is scary for so many reasons, but let's hope something more gets done going forward. We'll see what happens politically and otherwise going in the next few months. All right, thanks everybody for attending, and I really do hope you come back again. Tell all your friends. Definitely subscribe if you haven't. Remember that there's past shows that are actually here as well. And bring your questions. You can also send them to me in advance. You'll find my email in the description for the channel. And thank you all very much. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Next show coming up. And have a great Labor Day weekend. Take care.